Mr. Daniele Bolelli, it is such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. In preparation for this episode, I was listening to a few episodes that you've been on, and one of those was on the Align podcast with
Oh yeah,
Aaron
uh,
Alexander.
yeah.
And I found that one, particularly on this loneliness epidemic, was something that is front of mind and is front of mind with my audience, who tends to be like young men in their 20s. So for that demographic, what do you think? Like, what do you wish to stress onto those guys that are in their mid 20s, early 20s, and they're trying to make sense of things?
I think it's like structurally we live in a society that doesn't favor it. You're swimming. If you want good human relations with anyone outside of your immediate family, we don't live in a society that favors that because our society is geared toward work, toward getting stuff done, toward productivity, making money, and then going home, locking the door, hugging your PlayStation, and screw the rest of the world. That's where it's geared. So if that's how you're built, great. Then you got nothing to do. If you don't really need that much human interaction, just the little bit you get through once in a while, you talk to a friend, then you're good to go. If you are the kind of person that thrives on more human interaction and maybe a little deeper connections with people, then because you are swimming against the current here in this particular setup that we live in, you will have to put in more time and energy. You're going to have to figure out ways. And, some of them are honestly not that hard. Some of it is as easy as just call people back, or you're stuck in traffic, go through the list of people that you haven't chat in a while that are your friends, and call them. If or I know some people are weird. They're like, you can't call, you have to text first or some
Yeah.
stuff. So it's like, see what works for different people, but basically reach out to people on a regular, just because, not because you need something, not because there's some drama going on, just because it's like, hey, I haven't talked in a while, how's it going, what's going, just to be human, just
Mm.
to, like, sometime I'm and it's something that never happened to me in Italy in that regard. But like in US, when somebody calls me and they just want to say hi, I'm like, whoa, you actually want to check up on me? How sweet. You don't want something? That's bizarre. And when you think about it, it should be the most normal thing in the world, but we're not really used to slash trained to do it. Um, and I think that's an important aspect because it's easy. All you got to do is people reach out, call them back within a
Mm.
decent time frame if you didn't get that to them. Be the one who reach out to them, who instill that. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you can get along with somebody, you can have the best. In theory, we could be the best of friends, but unless you put the time and energy, you really aren't. You're friendly, you're a cool person, I like you, but you're not really friends. It's like uh, seeing each other once every 6 months. I mean, it's seeing each other once every 6 months. It can be as fun as you want, but that's 2 hours every 6 months. That doesn't really change the dynamics all that much. So, and again, you have to figure out if A, you want it, B, other people want it, and if you do, then act accordingly.
I think the part of that which I really try to, or I have been trying to really figure out, is the hustle culture productivity side
Mm.
of things.
Yeah.
Because as a 23-year-old type A guy who like has these goals and ambitions and things, it's hard for me to understand when I should be working hard, where I should be like trying to be as productive as possible versus just living life, versus leaving home and going to a new city because that's where all the people in the
Yeah.
community are that are doing big things there, whatever. How do you think I and anyone really in that situation should think about those things?
I mean, some of it is priorities, and there are no good or bad priorities in this. There are your priorities that work for you. So, one is just being very honest with oneself to see what is that would make you happy. do you need is which side is more important? Because there are a ton of things that are all going to ask for your time and energy, and you have to decide where you want to put it, whether you are, and most of us would like if we're pulled between social life, friends and family, and work, getting stuff done, and these, we like both. We like, I don't want to choose one or the other. So then it becomes your job to try to figure it out. Okay, how do I balance it out? How do I still do what I want to do in terms of hustle, but also how do I leave enough time that I dedicate to people I care about? And some of it could be as easy as because maybe the time is just not there. Some of it could be as easy as, a friend of yours who's into working out and you work out. You're like, hey, why don't we make it a thing that we just work out together on a regular? The way you're doing what you're doing anyway, you say, oh, I'm going to hit the weights 2, 3 times a week, or I'm going to go running or whatever. But you have at least some interaction with a friend who's there with you, sharing in the same activity.
Hmm.
I honestly think that's one of the reasons why so many people like stuff like jujitsu. I
Mm.
honestly don't think that many people are really that excited to spend that many hours just choking each other out. I mean, I love it, it's fun, but I think like half of the reason why people like it is because they have at least the semblance of a community where they see the same faces, they show up 3 times a week or whatever, and people will ask them how they are doing, they give each other a hug. And we live in a society where we have so little of that, that even something that superficial, it's oxygen for a lot of people.
Hmm.
It's so I think that like any opportunity you have to build up a little community, a little human interaction about activities you're already doing is gold, because that doesn't require you to take time off for something you enjoy. You know, you're not just saying, okay, I'm just gonna make extra time that I barely have for hanging out with friends. You can, of course, if you need it and you want to, that's a great idea. But if you even feel like, "Ah, I can't do that, I'm so caught into this hustle," try to figure out something to make activities you already do, make them social ones.
Hmm. And like, if you don't have that community of people around you, like, there's such a craving for it that it's not that hard to create for yourself, because there's that market for it, whatever it may be. If it's weightlifting or jujitsu, there's those communities that you could either create or find,
Yeah,
that aren't too hard to put together.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like me coming from Italy gives me is really a mirror image, because Italy is 100 times better in terms of human interaction, and it's 100 times worse in terms of getting stuff done. US is great to
Totally.
get stuff done, and it's terrible in terms of friendship. Italy is like, you call somebody even at the last minute, they'll meet you for dinner, they talk to you forever, they interact it's so much easier to make that stuff happen. And getting stuff done, launching a new idea, it's a royal pain. So for me, I mean, I hate that dichotomy. It's like, why does it have to be either or?
Yeah.
Why do we have to be stuck in this idea that we are either have a human life and get to have friends and stuff, or we get stuff done? Like, why can't we combine the best of those both worlds? But that's not up to you as a as an individual. It's up to the society as a whole. It's geared one way or another. You just have to figure out which way the current is going where you live, and how you can tweak it in the direction that you find a little more desirable.
That dichotomy is something that you really opened my eyes to, and the simple idea that it's not one or the other, and like a lot of times it's both. I
Yeah,
think the analogy you said on our first podcast was, um, be the cool, lighthearted party guy, or the deep philosopher that's in their room by themselves. And
yeah.
it's like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both of these things. And then that's just a simple example, but it applies to everything. And I think changing that lens is so important for people to kind of open up what's possible.
That's why I think I like so much Taoism and the whole
Mm,
yin yang symbol, because that's what the whole philosophy is about, right? It's not telling you pick one. It's not like draw a hard line in the sand and there's us versus them, this energy versus that energy, good versus evil. It's just telling you, look, there are opposite energies in the world, and neither one in themselves is good or bad. Is depending on who you are, depending on the situation, there's a balance that works, and then there are many other balances that don't work. And so it's up to you to figure out what works for you in a particular situation. And then you will change, the situation will change. So that balance will shift, and you have to be ready to recognize it and shift it accordingly. So you can be dogmatic about it's always in the middle. No, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you want to hustle like crazy and you'll have little time for social life. And that's okay in a particular context. And other times is completely the other way around, the balance, and other times is somewhere in the middle. And it's a constant dynamic process, and the skill in life is learning how to surf through that and learn how to
Mm.
navigate through that. That to me is what wisdom is recognizing the context and adapting accordingly to what you want to get out of that context.
It's understanding when to run, when to sprint, when to
Yep.
jog, when to
Yep.
walk.
Yep.
There's a time and a place for it, and it seems like like you were saying, though, the wisdom is born through knowing when to do what. It's
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. And where so often we are conditioned to the opposite, like what you were saying, where they ask us, do you want this or that?
Yeah.
And those questions are always a trap. It's like, no, I want both. What are you talking about? Why would I choose that? I'm like, no, I'm not playing this game. I absolutely want both.
So the last time we spoke, I think it was about like 14 months ago.
Mhm.
What is there anything new that's been front of mind for you since that time?
Um, I mean, that was right around the time I think when I was restarting History on Fire. So because was behind the paywall for a while, so I
Yep,
brought
yep.
back my history podcast out of full paywall. So I'm releasing episodes on a regular. That's fun. I'm enjoying doing that.
And you just did Musashi, which I'm sure is one that
Yeah, I
so
did.
many people are interested in.
I did. I just released part one of Miyamoto Musashi, and then in November I'll have part two. And so that one is an interesting one. Speaking of balance, because to be perfectly honest, I like Musashi a lot better before I studied more into his life and everything, because he's in some way he's fantastic. There's he's unattached to, he's never in the service of some warlord. He's his own person, very much an individual in a society that was extremely conformist. So that's really cool. He's a strategic genius. That's really cool. He's able to become a master in many different arts. He's a great artist. He's a great swordman. He's a great, he has this talent for multiple things, which is wonderful, not being a complete specialist. But speaking of social life, the question I have with Musashi is what for? Because like when you read about his life, he strikes you as a real lonely, cut off from society, partially by choice, but partially there's something off there,
Mm.
where I'm like, okay, you don't have a family, you don't have kids, you don't really seem to have deep friendships or contact. You're preaching this hardcore stoic ideal of just you by yourself in your cave with your sword and your brush. And I mean, if that's how you are, if that's how you're built, good for you. You figure out a way that works for you. Nothing wrong. I have a hard time to relate because it's such a lonely path that seems to be doesn't really seem to affect anyone else's life in a particularly positive way. And I'm not saying that everything we should be doing is for somebody else, but there's something to be said about being able to use whatever strength or talent you develop to actually also bring a smile to other people, to
Mm.
improve other people's lives, to so, that part of Musashi, I was like, ooh, that's a harsh way to live.
It reminds me of the like the cost of greatness, like a Michael Jordan or
Mhm.
a
Yep.
Tiger Woods,
Yep.
just these guys who They accomplish amazing things, but then if you sit down and say, "Do I want their life?" the answer is, in for most people, is no.
No, exactly. 100%. There's obsessiveness certainly gives you some power, but it's also a dark power that
Mm.
leads to unhealthy places. You achieve this thing where everybody goes, oh, the greatest player ever, the greatest this and that. But again, if you come home and you don't really have a relationship with your family, you don't really, it's like, what are you doing that for? So that you have your name in the record books? Never mind the fact that your name in the record book is pretty much going to vanish within a few generations and nobody's really going to remember you anyway. So, what exactly is the point there? And yeah, I'm with you. I don't think that's how you develop a healthy human being.
I think this is why one of the reasons why I've always been drawn to how you talk about things, because I remember being in a philosophy class and they asked us why we wanted to be in the class, and my answer was I'm obsessed with learning about the art of living, and I think so much of what you do is driven by finding that art and finding like what is this happy medium, the yin yang
Yep.
of a good life.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, with that said, if you were going to teach, if you were given a university or given a school and they gave you free reign or across the curriculum to one just develop a complete mind, but for the kids, but to also help them live a good life, how
hmm
do you think you would organize that
I mean, I
or
think
think about it?
there's like one game that I used to play a lot was thinking if money wasn't an issue and I could just learn, so my days are empty in that sense because I don't need to work for a living. Of course, that's not the case, but in Utopia, I was thinking like, what would that be like? And so then I would start thinking about what are the things I would love to learn about, and I would make never-ending list of completely ridiculous stuff because, of course, you need 50 lifetimes to learn all those things, right? There's no way I can learn them all. But it started giving me ideas about what are things that I enjoy, that I can see myself having fun playing with and stuff. And then you start narrowing down that list, and I would start going down stuff that's really closer to my heart, not as just as a random curiosity, but it's something that I deeply care about. And I think those lists are different from everybody. But I think like some things that are not different from everybody is you need some kind of a relationship with your physical self. You need to figure out some activity that makes you sweat, that works your body. For me, it's primarily martial arts or lifting weights. For somebody, but honestly, I like them all. It's like anything from swimming to whatever the hell, you name it. From just about every sport there is to me, anything that makes you sweat. There's something about your body that sometimes when your moods are overpowering and crappy and you can't really shift them, going through the body helps, getting that adrenaline going, getting the endorphins flowing, sweating stuff out. It's like it's an amazing in that sense the body is an amazing psychedelic. It helps you to change your state of consciousness like few other things. So there's a whole bunch there of different things that are physical, that are related to the body. There's a lot that's more, yeah, philosophical, so to speak, but I don't use the word philosophy in an academic sense, like the kind of crap that sometimes they teach you in academic courses. I mean it more in also a practical way, in like stuff that helps you find a better way of living, ideas that help you feel navigate the world in a better way. So something on the mental level that has its philosophy but with a very practical bend to it.
Mhm.
So there's that for sure. There's a bunch of stuff that's very specific, that there are all sort of art forms, whether art in the literal sense, anything from painting to learning how to program video games to learning how to make movies to being a musician to being some kind of art form that allows you to channel some of the emotions you have inside, some of the stuff you have inside in an artistic way. I think it's fantastic. Most people need, and again, not everybody's the same. Maybe for somebody who's more, they love, they become an architect and they love the drawing, designing houses and imagining spaces that are physical spaces where people get to live in, and they design these beautiful things that help people have live better lives. That to me is an art as well, you know. So those are some of them for sure. There's I mean, we can go down the list because there's so many, but those are just some of the big ones. I think those are good foundational blocks on which to build further.
So if we were to almost change that to what are the foundations of living a good life, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's going to come down to having something that you love to sweat for, like you're excited to work hard for in a physical sense, having an artistic, creative outlet, and then having a thing you're curious about that you're learning about. What else do you think makes for that life?
I think something, and I use the word in a non-religious way, but I think we need the rituals.
Rituals.
And by rituals, what I mean is this. It can be going to the gym and doing jujitsu, you know, it can be something far from religious, but like the idea being, what are rituals in that sense? They are experiences that help you bring back something you lost along the way. You know, maybe your mind got clouded by all sort of bad things that happen. Maybe you're in a bad mood, maybe you got stuck with work stuff that's giving you anxiety. Maybe, you know, a ritual to me is a way to rekindle the fire, to kind of get you back, sort of polish that mirror that allow you to get back to a place of clarity when you are feeling good, when you are feeling grounded, when you are feeling non-anxious. And, you know, take something like that's one thing that I actually do throughout the world pretty much in many different cultures. You know, some people would do it through more religious things, some people would not, but like a classic thing that you find across the globe is people doing sweats, you know, whether it's a sauna, whether it's a sweat lodge, whether it's you know, something where people would get together, get into this really hot space, sweat like crazy. For some people, that's all there is. They chit chat with their buddies while they're having a sauna. For some people, it's a religious experience, like all the cultures that do sweat lodges and stuff. But like, that's a powerful ritual. You know, it involves your body. It really puts you in a different state because of the heat and the sweat. It can be communal, where it's something that can be done with other people. And again, it can be structured in so many different ways, from pleasant hangout with friends, shooting the shit, to this deep religious thing. I'm not even advocating one or the other, but like the point being, those are moments that help you press the reset button on your day, on your state of mind, on so finding rituals, I think, is an important thing for mental health.
It seems like we've had this death of rate of passages.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about rituals, it reminds me of that, and how for most of time there was a thing for young men in their 20s or in their late teens, um, that really solidified boyhood to adulthood. And it seems like we've kind of gone away from those rite of passages. Do you think that that has a detrimental effect on us in some way?
100%. 100%. Because these are things that, I mean, there's a reason why you find them all over the globe in just about every society, is because they speak to something in the human psyche that helps us, that help us that helps to take us through some shifts in our life. You know, I mean, I was talking rituals in a more day-to-day level, in like kind of as a regular thing, but even like particular rituals that you're referring to that help you shift from one phase of your life to another. Those are important. Those are important. I mean, think about, at the most basic level, think about people who return from the army, or who return, even more so, who return from the army after having been at war. you have been through probably some really traumatic stuff. But also while, yes, you have been through a lot of traumatic stuff, you spent just about every minute of your life for the past whatever many years in close contact, in close camaraderie with a bunch of other guys your age, who more likely than not you have built these super strong bonds with. Now your time is up, you leave the army, you go back, you're in your apartment by yourself. You no longer have like this thing that has fed you for the past few years of just being in this tight knit unit, like this little tribe is gone. And you're just left alone with your whatever traumatic memories you got from being in intense situations. I mean, that's a recipe for PTSD, right? There is no reintegration into regular society. You go from being part of a community to being alone. I mean, no wonder people got messed up, you know? And I think is while PTSD is something people can experience in just about every culture due to some traumatic stuff they have gone through, it's so much easier in a context in which that community is not gone, or you replace it with a different community. You're part, and there's a rite of passage to sort of reintroduce you back into society, where you don't go from the battlefield one day to shopping at the grocery store the next with no transition, where there's a bit of like, I mean, even psychologically, the stuff that makes you a good soldier in the middle of the war is not the stuff that makes you a good citizen hanging out with your kids the next day. Those are very different energies. And so to be able to slowly turn one off and turn the other one on may be helped by a process that takes you through that. Not just assume it's like, oh, you're off today, so now go back to being a nice father who plays with your kids and they scream and yell, you're patient and kind after we just taught you how to shoot at people from a... It's like, it's too much of a shift, Most people don't have it that dramatic. I'm just using that example because, of course, it's a more dramatic one. But still, the even if you're like working nonstop all the time and you're hustle, 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 and you have to come home and take care of your kids, it's jarring, because it's like you go from one mindset to a radically different one. And if you bring the energy of the hustle to when you're taking care of your kids, before you know it, they're going to do something that pisses you off. You start yelling and screaming at them, and it's terrible. You're not going to be doing a good job as a parent.
I think about that, and like we do with all things, I filter it through my own experience. And I'm 23 and graduated college in the spring of last year. And I think about how that time period from finishing college to now, and there's two things that stick out. Is one, um, college is one of the last times we have a very solid community around us, and we all live in an apartment complex together, and it's like all these things that um, are very core. Like I didn't even love my time in university academically, but from a community standpoint, it was incredible.
Yep.
And then the second is this rate of passage stuff. It's we have our graduation ceremony, but my intuition tells me that that is lacking in many ways in a rate of passage sense. So, what do you think, like, for a time of your life like that, you can do to almost do your own rite of passage?
I mean, in that sense, and this is a classic, and I'm not saying anything new, but like one thing that a lot of people do either after high school or after college is travel,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like you cannot go, as you say, from just the one dimension where you're surrounded by your friends all day long and in this other world in which you're not going to be. And it's going to be so radically different. And, you are a student, now you're expected instead to, get a job, do this, do that. That's why a bunch of people travel just to, if they of course they can afford it, because that's not an easy thing to do, but like you just to get to go on this adventure away from everything, away from the familiar, away from it all, and just get to experience what it's like to be human, not in school, not at work, not in your familiar surroundings. You just get to be you exploring the world. I mean, how cool is that? That's a phenomenal rite of passage, right? It's one that I think there's a reason why a lot of people gravitate to that, even though nobody may have articulated to them as a rite of passage, because it helps you transition in between. Like travel, almost by definition, is this liminal space in between something and something. You know, you
Mm.
come from somewhere, eventually you're going to end up somewhere, and you are in this transitional space, which is pretty much the textbook definition of what a rite of passage will do, is take you through that space.
What do you think the value of, or the lessons that travel teaches you?
Um, you run and witness bunch of people involved in very different ways of life that maybe you never thought of, and you are exposed to that, and you're like, you see what you like about it. You see, forces you to look at your priorities, what you maybe some you see people structuring their daily life in a way you never thought of, and you're like, yeah, I like that better. There's something I want to build in my life where I want that. You know, these fucking guys, at the end of every day, they get together with their friends and chit chat over food. I like that. There's something cool about that. Maybe when I start my own life, I want to bring something like that. Maybe it's social, it's harder where I live, but maybe once a week I want to have a get together with my friend with food, and we make it a regular thing. And it's, it can be, you're exposed to so many different things that are far from your surroundings. And so it can be inspiring it can give you ideas about stuff you enjoy, stuff that you appreciate in other ways of organizing life that you can try to bring back in your own. So that's one thing. Another thing is it tends to cut out all the like your priorities shift. You have to figure out where you're gonna sleep, get there, food. You go back to basics in a lot of ways. We tend to reduce stress that sometimes when you just your absolute basics are taken care of, but now there's this sense of emptiness of like, okay, what am I supposed to do with myself that's meaningful? I have a roof
Mm.
over my head, I have food. Clearly, when you have to worry about those things, that's its own set of stress, but there's also something calming about it because your priorities are very clear. Whereas sometimes people get lost when there's too much space and their priorities are not super clear like that. Back to basics, back to shelter, food, and things like that. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's much easier to instill new habits when you travel. Like, for example, if I've noticed in times when I realize, man, I'm eating so much damn sugar, or I'm just so addicted to something, and now I'm traveling. And that's not really an option anymore because I'm not right next to my free. I'm going all over the place, living through this adventure. And then I realize, oh man, my relationship with food changed a whole lot, and then it becomes a little easier when you come back not to fall in the same pattern, at least not quickly. Maybe you will, but it will take a year or two or something, and then you can do something else to bring it back to the ritual idea, right? You can go back to something that shifts it again. So I think the fact that, yeah, you're out of the ordinary experience allows you both to learn things, to shift your priorities, to create new habits, because habits are a really hard thing to start. So be travel is one of the things that can help you being in that space where it's easier to drop old habits and create new ones. And never mind the fact that it's fun. You get to eat different foods, meet different people, see cool places, all of that.
It's you mentioned meaning in there, and alongside of this loneliness epidemic, I also feel like there's a meaningness
Mhm.
crisis going on, and my intuition says those two things are related.
Yeah.
Um, but I suspect that you've thought a lot about meaning.
I agree with you. I think they are intimately tied together. I think one of the issue with having a society that's all built around the individual is that we end up doing a lot of navel gazing about like, why do I feel this way? Why do I? When you are a little more less self-obsessed and also put more attention in other people around you, I think there's something healthy that comes up. Like maybe you are going through something, but you make your priority trying to do something kind for somebody on that day, trying to bring somebody else a smile. That's actually, on the surface, you're helping somebody else, but you're really primarily helping your own mental health, because that will help you shift away from this self-obsessive mode of analyzing your every action and feeling like there's no like you did something great for somebody, they smile, they walk away, their day got improved by 2%. There's meaning in that. You did something that left a mark today. um, I think there's something to be said for things that we do for other people in a way that we would never do for ourselves, that bring us a sense of meaning. And I think that's why, as you said, the connection there, I think, when you live as part of the way we live for hundreds of thousands of years, when you live as part of a tribe, making sure that everybody's taken care of, taking care of your people, watching out for people, doing that gave us meaning. That gave us, you have a place in this community and what you do matters. I think that's extremely important. Now, even if you don't live in a tribe and you don't have that set up, I think there's something to be said about putting your focus sometime, and not saying all the time, but sometime on the outside, sometime just thinking about how can I go about my day in a way that will bring a smile to somebody? What can I do that maybe I can't help myself? What can I do for somebody else? And that
Mhm.
start a cycle where it becomes a little easier for you to feel better too.
It's interesting hearing you say that, and then thinking about all of these individuals who have gone off and done all of this psychedelic medicine and ayahuasca and all this stuff. And it tends to be, from what I've seen, um, single guys in their late 30s and early 40s. And it seems like there's something to be said there about the individual and not having those kids or that thing outside of themselves to focus on so much and to be a servant of,
Mhm.
um, sparking a lack of meaning in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of goes back to that idea of balance, because it's like you need both. You need to take care of yourself, and sometimes yourself alone, not always be at the service of somebody else, not always really figure out what is that you need. And you need that. You also need to step outside of yourself and worry about other people, and stop the when taking care of yourself become obsessive or navel gazing, and instead you're doing something that has a meaning outside of yourself. That's exactly what I mean about making you choose between one approach and the other is ridiculous. It's like both are important, and you need to figure out when maybe you have gone a little too heavy on one side and is no longer delivering those results, and you need to go out of the comfort zone to the other direction. I don't think either or is bad or good for that matter. They
Mhm.
both have potential. And you probably need both.
And that balance isn't always 50-50 too, right? It's like
Not at all.
it could
Not
be
at all.
99-1. Like
Yep.
there's
Yep.
a
Yep.
lot to be said about that.
That's, I
And
think, the mistake that people make when they hear balance. They think, oh, avoid the extremes. It's like, no, maybe you go to an extreme at one point and you need it, and that's the right
yes,
thing, as long as you remember your way back.
yes. That's always what I loved about I read Matthew McConaughey's book,
Hmm.
Green Lights, and that was the thing that I really loved about him is he was very extreme in both directions to find that balance. He would go live with the monks and be silent for a month and then go out to Hollywood and party his face off. But he did it with a certain awareness and an intentionality
Yep.
of finding the balance through the polarities. And there's
Hmm.
something to be said about that, especially when you're young. There's like a certain recklessness that sparks wisdom, it seems like.
Yep. 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 I think 100% is like people. Very often people get into this mindset that like sacred or spiritual or whatever the hell it is this other dimension away from daily life. You have to be this monk in a cave in a mountain with clouds of incense. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there's something cool about that too. But that's like one of 10,000 ways that you can tackle life and drink its juice, so to speak. It's like, it's not that playing with kids and laughing like an idiot with your friends is any less rewarding or life
Spiritual.
enriching. Yeah, to me, it's like, that's why, like, one of my idols that I cover in History on Fire, I had a couple of episodes about EQ, was this Zen monk. But his thing was, he considered sex, drinking, and Zen all viable paths to spirituality, which, of course, on one end is funny because, like, wait, what are you talking about? And to him, it's like, it's how you approach things more than what you do. It's the energy you bring to them, the awareness you bring to them. And he intentionally was making almost sacrilegious points about being like, there is no sacred and profane. It's a way to approach life, regardless of what you're doing. Day to
Mm.
day life can be the most spiritual thing in the world. The spiritual doesn't have to be this made up image of what spirituality is.
That energy, that certain awareness you bring into things, and it reminds me of a quote you said in our first podcast that I bring up often and I reflect on often, and I'd be curious to hear you dive into it a little further. And you said, every great hunter knows you never stare at an animal too long, they'll feel it.
Oh yeah, where I was going with that. I'm wondering, I'm trying to think, because I know exactly, I mean, the context, I know what, I was trying to think, what do you remember what we were applying it to?
I don't remember if this came before or after, but I think we were talking about love, or and how um, I think you were talking about giving a massage,
Mm-hmm.
and when you are really focused on giving the massage, um, versus when your mind would start to drift a bit, immediately your wife would be able to know
Oh yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
feel it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that that's where how it came up. Um,
And there's a sweet spot there, right? Because if you are like, okay, I'm going under the scapula, moving at 90 degrees, it's like you're overthinking it, right? It's like then you are too focused in a way that kills spontaneity. If you are unfocused and your mind is somewhere else, you're not going to do a good job. So you have to have that sweet spot between a relaxed focus. You're
mm,
paying attention to what you're doing, but you're also not obsessively paying attention to what you're doing, where you allow some room for spontaneity to kick in and relax a little bit. So as usual, is this dance between energies where it's not about being hyper focused, it's not about being unfocused. It's somewhere in there. There's that sweet spot that allows you to deliver the right results, and that's actually what I like about a lot of art forms, physical things, that they
mhm.
give immediate feedback. You see if it's working or not. And so then you can, it's like, okay, clearly the balance is off. Let me tweak it a little. Still off. Okay, let's try this. And, you can run experiments on your sensitivity, on your ability to read the situation.
Yeah, I agree. It's what I loved about sports, competitive sports, like when I was in high school, and this dance between energies, and baseball in particular was my sport of choice. And it's a interesting dance between energies because you need to be, so if you tense up too
Yep.
much, it's hard, and it's one of those things where you really need to be relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting dance between it. And I think for a while I was thinking that I really missed baseball, but what
Mm-hmm.
I really missed was that dance. And
Yep.
I think in a way, podcasting has been a great avenue for that, because it's very similar in that regard, and it's almost like a flow state. It's um, peace from mind in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what's enjoyable about stuff like that. When you find, and again, you said it, like the flow state is like when you find that spot, everything feels awesome, and you can find it through just about any activity in the world. You can find, that's, I think, was one of the cool things about Musashi. He can be this amazing sword fighter, but then he's a painter, he's a calligrapher, he's a sculptor. He finds that flow through a whole bunch of different languages, so to speak.
Mhm.
So he's not bound to this one thing. I mean, that's one of the things I always find the saddest, is when you see maybe you know somebody for one particular activity you both enjoy, and then maybe they are like, oh, they send you a friend request on Facebook or some social media stuff, whatever it is, and you look and their entire social media is based on that one thing, and you're like,
Yeah.
Jesus, man. I mean, I like it, but there's other stuff in life, There's maybe, just because you found one place where you can feel that, trust me, you can find many other places where you can feel the stuff.
That Musashi quote, when you know the way broadly, you see the way in all things, is one of my favorites. It's so
Yep.
beautiful.
That is a beautiful one. That is undeniably one of the coolest. It's a fantastic quote.
And it's just to that point, right, of the flow and the art of doing all these different things there. It's almost the same journey of getting
Mhm.
good and of getting competent in those things. Um, it seems like there's a real beautiful flow to that.
Yep. There definitely is. And I think that's the good stuff about Musashi, where he goes into that ability to not be bound by a particular way, but teach you that a bunch of ways can take
Mm-hmm.
you there. And they are all valid. It's a very Zen thing in that regard. The idea that all art forms can be a vehicle for a Zen consciousness.
So, what surprised you about Musashi? Was it this darker side to him?
Yeah, and it's funny because I had the same feeling when I did episodes on Marcus Aurelius. And
Mm,
I don't think it's a coincidence, is that because they both emphasize heavy stoicism. And I like stoicism to a point. There's something about, that ability to be unaffected by outside reality, at least to some degree, and to keep a center and all of that. That's beautiful. The problem is that it ends up in some cases to be this very joy denying worldview. It's like Marcus Aurelius, like half of the time you're wondering, why don't you just shoot yourself? Because it's like everything you're saying is about duty, and pleasure is a distraction, and human relationships are a distraction, and this is a distraction. And, one of his lines was like, sex is nothing but an exchange of mucus and sweat. And you're like, wow, I wonder why your wife cheated on you. Like, such a romantic. It's hard to, it's like, he has a worldview that's so, I mean, really the only thing he seems to care about is duty. And I'm like, I don't know, I don't care that much about it. I'm like, I want to enjoy life. If you're not enjoying life, what the hell is the point? And he takes stoicism to a place where I don't find it healthy anymore.
mm,
Um, Musashi, to some degree, I get the same feeling, where it's so cut off from any, like he basically, I forget exactly how he phrased it, but in not so many words, he considered love a silly human emotion with, it's a distraction. I'm like, Jesus, man, you're preaching a loveless life as this ideal. Ugh, yike. There's something there that does not seem the most mentally well adjusted thing in the world. And both of those guys, again, they both have great quotes, they both have points that they bring up that are very valuable, and I'm not denying that. There's a reason why people like Marcus Aurelius, why people like Musashi. There's definitely good stuff, but I feel that they take that good stuff to such an extreme that, for me, loses all humanity.
mm. So, that dark side of Marcus Aurelius was just putting duty above everything and
Yeah.
being so anti enjoyment of life. And um,
Yep.
it's
Yep. Yep.
it's interesting, and I'm trying to piece through that. And that what I'm coming back to is this quote from um, Jordan Peterson, and I don't know the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of um, happiness is so fleeting that you need somewhere firmer to plant your flag. And it sounds like Marcus Aurelius planted his flag towards duty.
Yep.
And I would be curious for you, like, where do you think is a firmer, better place to plant our flag if this pleasure and happiness is too fleeting and too meaningless in a way to plant your flag there? Where do you think a good place would be to?
I mean, the pleasure happiness being fleeting, I think it depends how you define it. Because, of course, the highs that are super high are by definition not every other moment. They are highs, they are highlights of the day. If you're gonna wait to feel good about things only when you feel the high, well, good luck, because you're gonna have it once, twice, 3 times a week, whatever many times, but then you're gonna have every other moment in between the highs where you feel like, okay, now what? This sucks. Where's my high? You cannot be, if that's your idea, and it sounds like that may be Jordan Peterson, but if that's the idea of happiness, I think there's a problem, because that's unsustainable. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you cannot think that just the super high moment is a source of happiness, because they are rare. Even if they are once a day, they are still rare, because there's 23 more hours in the day, kind of thing. So to me, there's something about enjoy the highs when they come. They're awesome. They feel great. But also finding a baseline that's more, is not about how, explosion and color and fun. And it's more about a baseline of contentment with the way things are, of just satisfaction with ordinary living.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great Zen thing that's about the wondrous miracle that is to chop wood and draw water from the well, which, of course, at the time when they were written, they were the most ordinary activity that everybody would do every day. You need wood to stay warm, you draw water from the well. So it's talking about the most basic day to day activity. And the whole point to him was like finding the miracle in that, finding the beauty in every second, not wait for the moment that blows your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it comes from gratitude, and it's a way of like looking at life, right? It's like I can be thinking about, I don't have this, I want this done, I can get this, and there's always stuff that's not working that I would want it to be better. But if I'm waiting for my happiness to come when I have all those things, it never will. Because even when I achieve those things, there will be other things that I want that I don't have, and so on. And so keeping my mind in two places at once. On one level, the direction where I want to go. I want certain things to happen, so I'm going to work to make them happen. And on the other hand, I'm sitting here looking around exactly as things are right now and find a way to enjoy is like that feeling of like nothing needs to change. Everything is
Mm-hmm.
perfect as it is. And you're like, no, it's not. I want this thing. And it's like both are true at the same time,
Yep.
having that feeling of like this as it is right now with all its problem and all that, I need to find a way to be grateful for it, and at the same time looking for the highlight, looking to bring things to a higher place, and so on, hand in hand. Or if you are
Mm-hmm.
constantly looking for the next thing, even when you get it, you'll get the Jordan Peterson thing. It's fleeting, it lasts an hour, you pat yourself on the back, you're ecstatic, and now you're back to ground zero.
Mm-hmm.
You need that other side to it, the miracle of everyday moment kind of feeling, that appreciation for the most mundane aspects of life. And I think it's a muscle. I think you cultivate it by paying attention to things in a certain way, by
Mm-hmm.
reminding you of certain things that are, I go into a shower and there's this miraculous warm nice water enveloping. I have my own private waterfall in my bathroom. How cool is that? It's
Yep.
like it's paying attention to when you eat. I can just shove a bunch of food down my mouth, which, by the way, I do. I tend to eat like a wolf in like about 6 seconds. But also there's something to be said for really tasting that food. Not like I'm eating while I'm looking at email, while I'm talking to somebody, while I'm doing, is like I'm going through the motion. I'm not deriving any pleasure from it.
Mm-hmm.
Really have a moment where, man, this tastes so good. Really dive deep into that sensation. And then the same activity that was just ordinary, whatever, now becomes a source of pleasure, even happiness, if you define happiness in a slightly different way.
Yeah, it's that striving for heaven, but yeah, at the same time, just enjoying the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's an exercise, right? I struggle with it. Like there's in the past year, I got super happy a few months ago because I finished writing a novel and I never written fiction before. And I was super happy with how it came out. And I'm just having the hardest time with, publishing industry is a strange beast. So I'm having a hard time with, agents and, somebody told me that, oh yeah, the stuff you're writing in historical fiction right now, 90% of the readers are women. And so almost every other book is romance fiction set in the past in historical fiction. And I'm like, what the hell? So I come up with all these examples that are not, and they're like, yeah, those are all at least 20 years old or older. That's not what people are publishing or reading today. And so I'm like, oh, this sucks. Point being, I have this frustration of like, oh, I really want to get it out there. I really want to do this. It's really pissing me off because I have this strong, it's a passion project. I put so much and I'm struggling to make it go where I want it to go. And I can dwell on that, and I do from time to time, and then I'm miserable. I'm pissed. I have this sense of hunger. I have this sense of lack of something that I cannot feel. I feel like frustrated. Or I can sit back and just think, I got to write something I really enjoyed. Family and friends will read it and they're having a blast. I'm sitting in a garden, I'm eating good food. What the hell do you have to complain? I mean, this is great. Like, sure, it would be great if you publish it and people read it, and whatever, in the great scheme of seeing, is really not that big of a deal.
Mhm.
You have like about 12,000 other things to be grateful for right now. And I shift, right? Some moments I forget, and I'm like, yeah, but I want that one thing, and I'm mad that I don't have it, and da 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 da. And then the other moments, it's like, shut up, just this is as good as it gets.
Yeah. I mean, I get it, but in that example, it seems like there's also just the third option of all those other books that were written that were in the past 20 years, or
Sure.
that this is like a rare category that
Mhm.
isn't used too much nowadays. I mean, but you're also a very rare individual with an incredibly rare network of people that you
Sure,
know
sure.
and you're friends with, and um, it seems like it's one of those things that it's like it's the advice that a publisher would give to all the other
Sure.
novelists, and it doesn't perfectly apply to your situation.
No, and I mean that's how it is. Is like you're always looking to carve an exception, but of course, when you're looking to carve an exception, you're swimming against the current. You're gonna have to work 3 times as hard to get something done. But that's the reality with all sort of stuff. If I think about all the projects I have, all the ideas I have that I enjoy, the overwhelming majority are never gonna work. And it's a frustrating feeling because they are all your babies, you're all like, you see it is like, this is going to be so fun, this is great, we could do this and that, and most of them are going to go nowhere. And so there's one way to look at it and be really frustrated because it's like you have all these ideas and only some of them see the light of day. And there's another way to see it as just part of the game.
Yeah.
You have a bunch of ideas, and if one every 10 goes in a meaningful way, you're doing good. That's one more than most people. And but yeah, it's a dance right there. I do shift from frustration to what am I frustrated about? This is as good as it gets, and back and forth.
There's also something to be said there that if that success was a given, that it would make the whole thing meaningless, and there would be no courage in writing the book or no greatness in it because success was guaranteed. So like there's a beauty in that as well.
I think the stuff that strikes me for people who really have built a bit of a culture on the hustle, on working hard, on discipline, on this, and that will deliver result. I think one of the sources of frustration is realizing the randomness of it all. That, is like I was in the car with my daughter and we're listening to music and I played 2 songs and I'm like, how do you think they stack up with one another in terms of quality? And she was like, no, they're both amazing. It's little different, but they're both fantastic songs, really high level of both. And I was like, well, The first is Amy Winehouse, and she sold like 3 gazillion copies. The next one is a friend of mine, and I think his mom bought a copy and 5 friends, and nobody will ever hear it. And she was like, how is that a thing? They are right there in terms of quality. One can prefer one or the other, but they are. And I'm like, unfortunately, quality is one of about 40 factors that go into something is successful in that sense or not.
Yeah.
So if you think that just because you work hard and have the discipline and have the willpower and even develop talent, that's gonna go somewhere, that just buying you the lottery ticket. You still need to win the lottery then.
It
And
reminds me of a story I heard on a podcast recently where the guest was saying that they had a good friend who, for the longest time, was a graphic designer for nightclub flyers.
Mhm.
So just nothing
Yeah,
special, just making a few $1,000s every here and there. But he was so talented at graphic design, and then based on the advice of the guest, he went to Dubai and got into the cryptocurrency scene, blah blah blah, Web3, and then now he's like this famous what are those images called, the
NFT
images,
or
NFTs. Yes, now
yeah,
he's like a famous NFT artist and he's making millions of dollars, but
right.
it's the same skill set, just
Okay.
applied in two different things.
Okay. I mean, even I think about like realistically, I had a very good run, and I still do to some degree with History on Fire in terms of success and audience and even making money. None of that would have happened if it wasn't for the fact that I had a couple of, well, actually a long string of lucky breaks. I ended up on Rogan podcast 9 times for no particular good reason. I think it was just a weird alignment of the stars. And I mean, after the first time, he liked me and the audience liked me, so that's why he had me back. But like the first time was completely random for me being there. I had support from people like Dan Carlin pushing it with his, I had, I had a bunch of lucky breaks. I could have created History on Fire exactly the same way, and it could have had 1/50th of the audience with no change in quality whatsoever.
Hmm. What I've been thinking about with that, or in context to that, is increasing your surface area of luckiness,
Hmm. Yep,
by doing the right things and
sure.
being a good person, making
Yep.
amazing work, whatever. And then you stack up that probability that you do get that lucky break, like
Yeah,
in your
absolutely.
example as well.
Absolutely. It's the equivalent. In fact, even like not only be nice, but also talent is something that rather than having one lottery ticket, now you have 50 lottery tickets. Your odds have definitely improved.
Yeah.
They are still a far way from a guarantee, but you have better odds than you did before, thanks to hard work and discipline and talent. But again, I think we tend to skip that passage where we
Yeah.
think hard work, discipline, talent equals an outcome. And it's like, no, it just increases the odds of that outcome. And those odds are still suck, but they are better than they were before. Like we're so used to hearing, there's that survivor bias that we always hear the stories of the ones who made it, of the ones who, and can you believe? And then suddenly I went from living in the gutter to having that moment where they discover me and it all went, and that does happen, but there's also 50 other people who did the exact same thing for which it doesn't happen. And so I think there's something humbling in recognizing the role that luck plays in success.
Mm.
Not to say that what you do doesn't matter, it matters a lot, but it's not the only thing. Like we have this myth of the self-made man that you just work hard, it's gonna happen. It's like you have dramatically increased the odds that something good will happen. You have not ensured them. Your
Mhm.
own effort by themselves do not lead to that outcome. There's an element of luck still involved. You reduce that luck rather than being depending on the lottery ticket flying in your hands. But reducing the luck and ensuring outcome are two different things.
Do you think there's some value there in being almost delusional with it? Like being that guy who,
Imagining like self belief to the 10th power.
yeah.
There is, as long as you make it. because then when you don't make it, then there's the moment where you shoot yourself because you build this whole
Oh no.
identity on success, and then when it doesn't work, suddenly your whole castle of cards come crumbling down and you're miserable. So yeah, to some degree it's a weapon, it's a good weapon to some degree. It's a delicate thing because yeah, if you go too long believing and finally you realize it has been 20 years, it hasn't happened, the whole thing may crash hard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And for you having been on Rogan 9 times, and it's something that's particularly interesting for me as a podcaster, and I think just everyone has this fascination with him because of how long one he's been doing it and how much success he's had with it. Do you think there's anything that makes him particularly unique as a host that has separated him in some way?
I mean, it's interesting because the what he does is a formula that it's pretty much what they tell you not to do, in the sense that the typical success formula is you find your niche and you go down that niche because there's an already built-in audience that care about that one topic, and you run with it. He's doing the Musashi approach. He's doing the one day we talk about sports, one day we talk about philosophy, one day we talk about kind of this mix of a bunch of things, which potentially can mean that you have no audience because there's no one set ready audience that listen to you. Or potentially you can have an everybody audience because everybody cares about some of those things. Typically, that generalist approach doesn't work. For him, it worked, and suddenly then you're not at the level of the success within one specific field. You're 10 levels above because you drew from, like, he drew his UFC audience, he drew his comedy audience, he drew his audience from Fear Factor, he drew the audience from people who are into psychedelics, he drew. So that's like where all the doors that could be closed because the psychedelic guy like, I want to hear about MMA, screw that, and something else. So you really have nobody listening. He gets everybody listening. Some of it is ability, some of it is luck.
It's interesting. And this whole conversation um, lies upon discipline in a way because we've been talking about for a lot of this the factors that are at play for luck. I mean, for success. And discipline is that one that we haven't really touched on. We quickly mentioned it, but it's an interesting one because it's a hard balance between being ultra disciplined when you don't want to do things and still
Mhm.
doing it anyway versus just flowing a little more and just enjoying the day. How do you approach discipline and how do you go about thinking about it?
I think if you're just thinking about the outcome, you're screwed because the outcome is not insured. And, if you're thinking, I'm going to work hard so I get this outcome, yeah, good luck because odds, maybe you will, maybe you won't. I think is you need to approach discipline the way, like there are in like karma yoga ideas in like Hindu philosophy. There's this notion that like some guys going through the training, they will have them move all the rocks from one side of the river to another. And so, your mind is thinking there's a purpose. I'm doing all this hard work because then we build something on the other side. And then in the afternoon, you move the rocks back to where you started. The idea being you're just doing it to do it. You're not doing something to achieve an outcome, to achieve a result. And so you approach discipline like, of course, there's places you want to go, there's stuff you want to achieve thanks to this discipline, but you're approaching it the way it's like breathing. You should still keep breathing. That's a good idea. You should not stop. So, you take it like you put in your discipline and effort, and that's its own reward in some way. That means that you're fighting against some forces of laziness, of stuff that are inside you. And by putting in the work and being disciplined, you're defeating them.
Mm-hmm.
That's making you a stronger human being. That's making you a more reliable human being that loved ones can count on. That's its own reward, regardless of whether that discipline leads you to have the success in another sense. It's like you cannot have any success without it. But just because you do it, if you're obsessed with the outcome, you're going to burn yourself out and hate every moment of the process. So it's really, there's a satisfaction in the process from I'm doing this thing. It's I just defeated that laziness, that inner voice of doubt, that stuff. That feels awesome on its own, regardless of what you achieve thanks to it.
Mhm. It's rewarding intrinsically in the
Yeah,
pursuit, not
yeah,
because of the external goal that it's
hmm,
ultimately guiding you towards.
yep.
So I love to ask my guests this question, and I tend to ask it as the first question of the podcast. Um, and it's, what's one concept that has had the biggest tangible impact on your life? And my guess is your answer is balance. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think there's that yin yang idea that I find it. I mean, it's weird because on one hand, it's like every other damn thing as a yin yang drawn somewhere, but like, so it's almost so pop as to lose meaning. But on the other hand, when you really stop to think about all the implications, all the way that it applies to day life, I really have a hard time imagining a symbol that captures the way life works better than that in some very profound ways that applies to literally everything you do. So yeah, that is, if we're talking about concepts, that's a very key one for me.
I think about it in the sense of relationships. It seems like the
Mhm.
perfect analogy for that. This
Absolutely.
yin yang is powerful, and it's something that we've kind of gone away from. It's not very talked about nowadays.
Because it's hard, because it's easy to tell somebody, do these 5 things, don't do these 7 things. Okay, that's easy, anybody can understand that. This is good, this is bad, again, easy. In all circumstances, do this, don't do that. It's much harder to tell somebody, okay, this is good to a point in some circumstances, this is also good to a point in some circumstances, but it can also be bad. Now it requires you to think too hard. It requires you not to be able to fall back on a dogma to rely on. Now you have to dance on your feet and smell the situation and
Mhm.
understand how to tweak it. And that requires a level of self confidence that's so much higher, because you have to trust your instinct, you have to trust your ability to navigate something outside of the map. Whereas a good dogma just tell you do this, don't do that. It's so much more relaxing mentally because it's easy. All you got to do is follow it. Very easy to achieve. That ability to navigate is not.
I'm smiling because it's something I think I've realized through my evolution of learning about nutrition
Hmm.
and hearing all these dogmas and the way
Yep.
people think about things, and you know that moderation is harder than that extremism,
Yep.
and that
Yep.
extreme diet is a lot easier to do than that moderate diet where you have a bite of ice cream and a bite of pizza every so often. But we don't usually think about things in that light.
It's too much. It's too much hard work for most people. I mean, even like the Taoists tend to be totally. They are kind of dicks about it. It's funny, but they are like their thing was like most philosophy, most I want to attract people. The Taoist idea tends to be the initial approach is often, what? You want to learn about this stuff? No, just please don't bother. Just go to Confucianism. They'll give you some simple rules to live by, make you avoid making too many screw ups. Good enough for you. This is dangerous ground. You'll get hurt playing with these big ideas. It's too much. So they have this thing like, yeah, it's not for everybody. Not because potential is for absolutely everybody, but it's for absolutely everybody who has talent, sensitivity, awareness, and develop a whole bunch of qualities that are not the most common.
So, for the person who isn't familiar with Taoism, what is the general idea of it? Is it that yin yang?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, there are a few, but that's a key aspect. Like, it's extremely non-dogmatic in the sense that it recognizes that context is king, that things are changing depending on the context. They are changing like change is a process of life that's happening all the time. and what work in one context does not work in the next. Nothing wrong with that idea. It was good in that context at that time, but you need to read the situation and adapt to right now. And when you discover it and you're so excited, it's like, oh, that worked like a charm. That was fantastic. Great. Tomorrow is going to be different. And you need to figure out how to tweak it again. It's like, so that's part of the message is extremely non-dogmatic, is you need to constantly work on tweaking that balance to adapt to ever-changing context.
Everything's nuanced.
Yeah, it is big time.
So when are you thinking about releasing the novel? What's the latest on that?
I mean, I would still eventually, if I keep going for too long and I don't find a venue through the traditional publishers, of course, I'll self-publish.
Okay, good. So it's gonna get out here.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
at
gonna
some
be able
point,
to eventually get my hands on it.
yeah,
So
at some point, I
good.
would still like to try, because I still
Good.
think that the problem with self-publishing is they are only going to reach your existing audience. You're not going to
Mhm.
reach anybody else. Whereas with a publisher, there are possibilities that it can go other places. So we'll see. I'll keep trying a few things, see what happens. And then if nothing happens and another year has gone by, I'll be like, screw it, self-publish.
Yep. What was the hardest part about writing the book?
I mean, you have 10,000, all the things that come up when you create anything, which is fear of failure, your own inner voice trying to make you not do the things that you care about the most because you're scared not to live up to your own hype. So yeah, it forces you to really stare at yourself long and hard and see all your weaknesses, all your insecurities, all that stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, it goes back to Musashi, right? When you know the way broadly, you see the way in all things. It's
Yep,
the same things that apply to writing the book are the same things I'm sure when you started jujitsu that you felt as well,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely, 100%.
That's a great way to bring this conversation full circle. Is there anything that we haven't discussed today that you've been thinking about lately, or you want to say?
No, I think this sound good. This sound
Awesome.
like we covered a lot of ground, so good stuff.
I'm always so impressed with you, and it's always such a blast to get on a podcast with you. And I'm always so impressed, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this was a fun conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great one.